Solo expeditions in Elden Ring Nightreign can be fairly challenging, but once you work out a strategy to consistently complete them, they are a very efficient way to rack up rewards without having to rely on good teammates. This guide will cover just about everything that goes into becoming a strong enough solo expeditioner to defeat the final boss, including Everdark variants, and much of this info is equally helpful for those playing in teams. As usual, useful timestamps can be found in the video description. To start, we need to pick a Nightfarer that excels in solo expeditions. This can be any class that is capable of high DPS with a bonus if they are also tanky. The top contenders for me are either Wilder or especially Raider. However, I have also been able to defeat the final main boss, Aspect of Night, with both the Recluse and Iron Eye, in addition to Wilder and Raider. A tip for Recluse is to use a relic that gives the Wraith Calling Bell at the start of the expedition, or find one from a Tombstone loot orb early game. It's a really powerful item to have. All that said, Raider is a top tier solo expeditioner when it comes to the Everdark boss variants. I've defeated the Everdark variant of Adele multiple times and defeated Everdark Fulgor on my first ever attempt by using Raider. For anyone that doubts the incredibly powerful nature of the Raider, just pay attention to how I use his character skill Retaliate to negate damage and pull off high damage combos. That being said, so long as you can get a given class to deal massive amounts of damage relatively quickly, it should be viable for solo expeditions. After selecting our Nightfarer, we will need to outfit them with a great set of relics over at the Relic Rite station. For Raider, I really enjoy this selection of all yellow relics. 2 of these are only obtainable after defeating an Everdark boss for the first time, and can be purchased from the Collector Signboard catalog with Sovereign Sigils. The relic that can really increase our power over the course of an expedition is the one that increases our attack power permanently for each Evergaol prisoner that we defeat. The Knight of the Miasma relic is also pretty good and makes Raider's starting weapon much stronger. With all that said, we will start our expedition by clearing the point of interest that we land at, then head towards any nearby POI that is likely to have a Stonesword Key for us. Also, if you find any boluses, be sure to use them as they permanently raise your resistance to various status ailments such as blood loss or frostbite. Let's briefly go through all relevant locations and where to find Stonesword Keys at them. The first is unmarked and is the collection of broken down caravans. One of the caravans has an ornate chest on the back of it that has a high chance of containing a Stonesword Key. Next, there are ornate chests that have a chance to spawn in specific locations across the map. The location of these can be revealed on the map by certain relics or by interacting with treasure maps in the castle points of interest. A third spot to find Stonesword Keys are the merchant villages. This special point of interest is dedicated solely to a special merchant that sells an expanded inventory, including Stonesword Keys, level 2 smithing stones, and a selection of talismans. Next, let's cover the 2 castle variants. The first is entered from beneath a broken bridge. On our way up to the top floor, we can enter a gatehouse to our right to find an ornate chest, which has a high chance of containing a Stonesword Key. There are also multiple lesser chests throughout the castle and on the rooftop that have lower chances of dropping Stonesword Keys. Alternatively, there are the castles that we can just enter through the front. There is a room near the ground floor with 3 lesser chests, and as you can see in this clip, they can indeed contain Stonesword Keys. There is also an ornate chest on the rooftop that has a higher chance of containing a Stonesword Key. Then there are the cathedral-like structures, of which there are 2 variants, the Holy variant and then all the others. For every type but the holy variant, an ornate chest can be found on the ground level up on a dais behind a tomb of sorts. For the holy variant of Cathedral, we will need to climb up to the top floor. There is an ornate chest near a cluster of oracles with a high chance to drop Stonesword keys. As for the camp archetype locations, I've searched them pretty thoroughly, but have been unable to find any ornate chests or mini Stonesword keys. When it comes to the ruins location archetype, they do each have a chamber that is hidden beneath an illusory ground, with 2 ornate chests contained therein. However, I've never found a Stonesword key in these chests. Instead, they seem to contain rare weapons and talismans more often than not. As a quick bonus tip, you can click the right stick or whatever input is required to show details for a weapon when selecting your reward from a boss fight. This will reveal the weapon type, which can be very useful when trying to find weapons that are compatible for dual-wielding combos. For example, the Column's Halberd is actually a colossal weapon, not a halberd, and so can be paired with Raider's starting weapon, which is also a colossal weapon. Assuming we've gotten at least 1 Stonesword key, we can make our way to the nearest Evergaol. Evergaol prisoners come in 3 tiers, and while lower tiers are generally easier, this is not always the case. For example, starting at Tier 1 prisoners, the Grave Warden Duelist and Omen are both very easy to defeat. Then there are the more difficult Stoneskin Lords and Nox Warriors. These are outdone by the Crystallians and Beast Brigade. And finally, we have the Beastmen and Banished Knights, which in my opinion should really be Tier 2 prisoners. Tier 1 prisoners are guaranteed to have 10,000 runes as one of their reward options, and I would pick this over basically anything but perks that increase runes gained, amount healed by flasks, or improved dodge window. Next, we have Tier 2 prisoners. The easiest in my opinion is the Lone Crucible Knight, followed by the Dragonkin Soldier. There may be other Tier 2 prisoners, so let me know if I missed any, but regardless, Tier 2 prisoners always have 20,000 runes as one of their reward options. Then we have Tier 3 prisoners. The only ones I am aware of are the Ancient Dragon and Godskin Duo. The Ancient Dragon is a bit easier, if not a tad more annoying, but either way, each is guaranteed to have 30,000 additional runes as one of their reward options, which is extremely helpful in our goal to reach the max level of 15. Quick side note here with these red bodies, these are the corpses of fallen Nightfarers from other expeditions. They can sometimes contain very useful items like smithing stones and Stonesword keys. Also, any weapons they hold will have a buff that corresponds to their class. In this case, it is the Recluse's Grief. These buffs raise core stats that are essential to each respective class. Back to our main objective during day 1, we are going to traverse to the various Evergaols across Limveld, stopping along the way at points of interest with possible Stonesword keys, marked treasures, and churches for additional flask charges. If you hear a faint but constant ringing noise, look around for a treasure scarab. These bugs have set locations where there's a chance of them spawning. They will drop a talisman when defeated, which can often impart great benefits. This map here shows the location of most field bosses in Limveld, which we can incorporate into our pathing for extra runes and rewards. Speaking of which, let's go through the most common field bosses, ordered by how difficult they are versus the rewards that they give. Starting with the lesser field bosses, we have the Knight's Cavalry, which is a lesser boss that is also fairly easy to defeat. There's also the Demi-Human Queen, which is probably the easiest field boss, and then next we have the Leonine Misbegotten. It's a glass cannon that can be defeated quickly, but has powerful attacks. Also, watch out for bosses with glowing red eyes, as they tend to deal increased damage. The Ancient Hero of Zamor is deceptively tough and is capable of outputting a burst of damage thanks to its frostbite attacks. We then have the Grafted Scion, which can be a bit intimidating, but has a fairly clear attack pattern and has plenty of opportunities for counterattacks. We then have its nastier cousin, the Royal Revenant, which is much more ruthless in its attack patterns. With that, we can move on to the greater field bosses. These are guaranteed to give at least purple rarity rewards with a higher chance of legendaries. I would say the easiest of these is the Ancestor Spirit, and this is followed by the Erdtree Avatar and Ulcerated Tree Spirit, both of which are fairly weak to frostbite and fire. I've been able to tackle all of these bosses with fairly consistent success, starting at around level 7 or 8. Taking things a step up, we then have the Magma Worm and Flying Dragons, which can be a bit of a pain, but don't pose too much of a threat otherwise. Following these are the Horse Riders, those being the Tree Sentinel, its draconic cousin, and finally the Royal Carrion Knight. I would hold off on challenging these foes until around level 10 or higher. Everything changes if they have glowing red eyes. At that point, I would avoid fighting them until near max level. Finally, we have what I would call the tough SOBs. I wouldn't mess with these unless your build is particularly strong and you feel confident in your ability to avoid direct attacks. We'll start with the Deathrite Bird, which isn't super tanky, but can deal massive amounts of both physical and frostbite damage. Next up is the Blackblade Kindred, which is extremely aggressive and deals high amounts of physical damage. Finally, we have the Bell-Bearing Hunter, which is the single most difficult boss that you can find out in the field, especially the red-eyed variant. This boss is almost never worth your time and should be one of the last that you fight in an expedition. Also, I should mention here that when we are inspecting rewards, we should prioritize weapons that we can actually use in our build, followed by passive bonuses such as improved dodge or amount healed by flasks. Finally, we should look at the passive bonuses of weapons that we can't directly use, as those can also be beneficial. For example, any class benefits greatly from the Taking Damage boosts damage negation passive. Another great one for melee classes is Successive Attacks negates damage. Such passives are granted just by having the weapon in our inventory, even if it's not equipped. The only time this is not true is when a weapon's bonus effect has a hand icon near it. This indicates that the bonus, such as Attacks Restore HP, is only active when that weapon is equipped. Overall, effectively prioritizing the rewards that we pick will help us get powerful early on in a run and not waste any rewards. One of the reasons it's important to get powerful quickly is because we can be ambushed by what are called raids at any time in an expedition. These are usually a boss that must be dealt with quickly, otherwise having severe consequences. I'll just be covering the most frequent raid event in this video, which is the Fell Omen. Regardless of what you are doing, if you hear there is no escape for thee, drop everything and relocate to a clear area where you can fight the Fell Omen. Use everything at your disposal to defeat it and do not take any chances. That's because while defeating the Fell Omen grants a nice chunk of runes and a very helpful buff, especially if obtained early on, the consequences of losing this fight are equally as bad. Being defeated by the Fell Omen results in a permanent debuff that increases damage received for the remainder of the expedition, and I often just give up on the run if I get it. It can be extremely frustrating to reach the end of an expedition only to find out that you just take too much damage to defeat the final boss. Moving on, at some point we will want to upgrade our primary weapon to purple rarity. This can be accomplished by delving into one of the 3 mine tunnels in Limveld, each having 2 entrances. There is an unnamed boss in each, that being a troll, plate armored knight, or pumpkin head. They are all guaranteed to drop a level 2 smithing stone when defeated. The various sources of loot within each mine tunnel also have a fair chance of dropping level 1 smithing stones and a small chance of dropping a level 2 smithing stone. Also, keep in mind that while you need to reach level 7 to effectively use purple weapons that are found in the field, you can use upgraded purple weapons at the level that they required for the rarity that they were initially found at. In other words, we can upgrade our starting weapon to purple rarity and use it effectively at any level. Given that mine tunnel bosses are relatively easy, I would prioritize visiting a mine shaft as soon as you find yourself near one. Afterwards, see if you can't make your way to a merchant, which can be found outside of any castle or fort point of interest. Merchants sell level 1 smithing stones for a modest price, and each merchant has a nearby anvil where you can upgrade your weapons with smithing stones. At this point in my expedition, the night began closing into the final day 1 zone. Even so, I'm taking advantage of all the time I still have to get more done before making my way over to that zone. When the night began closing in, I was at level 8 and had 5 health flasks. Before making my way to the zone, I stopped by a nearby church to get an additional flask charge. I then went to the central fortress where there are many merchants and strengthened my armament to purple rarity. With still more time to spare, I went into the fortress and defeated a minor field boss as well as multiple banished knights to get a big chunk of runes. While it's important to take advantage of remaining time, it's also important to realize when the risks outweigh the potential rewards and just head to the safe zone. The easiest rule to follow for this is that we should not be fighting in the damaging night zone for more than a second or so. All in all, rather than just head to the final zone on day 1, I was able to get an additional flask charge and character level before safely heading over. We want to quickly get on with our expedition after defeating the final day 1 boss. However, before running out into the night, make sure you see the final day 1 site of grace appear after defeating the boss. If it doesn't appear, that indicates a special event in which the night threatens us anew. What this means is that we will get our flasks and health back, but will then have to fight a second major boss battle. These are actually very nice in my opinion, as they are essentially a free additional major reward and chunk of runes, and don't take away from our limited time during the day. This event can occur after the final boss of either the first or second day. Once we have defeated the 1 or 2 final bosses of day 1, we can immediately start towards our first destination of day 2. We will take some damage from the night before it recedes, but we can just heal through it and visit a site of grace to regenerate our flasks. Greater field bosses are marked on the in-game map for day 2, and we can use our custom map of field boss locations to deduce which spots have minor field bosses. Our goal for day 2 should be to complete as many Evergaols as we can, and this may include quickly scouting points of interest for Stonesword Keys, as well as defeating field bosses, especially greater field bosses, along the way. This will allow us to reach level 15 and accumulate more powerful weapons. We should also make time to visit another mine shaft if it is necessary to upgrade one of our weapons. At this point, I'm not bothering with the bosses that are found at points of interest, as they don't really give much runes or beneficial rewards. However, if they are quick enough to defeat, feel free to make that judgment call yourself. I'm already mapping a path out here that will take me to 2 Evergaols, 1 lesser field boss and 1 greater field boss. After defeating this Evergaol, I jump down near the spirit tree where I have deduced that a minor field boss is waiting. It only took a second to defeat, and a quick side note here is that the improved flask HP restoration buff is almost always worth taking, in addition to improved dodge and amount of runes gained. In any case, I then used the spirit tree to quickly move north towards a greater field boss and Evergaol. The greater field boss was the relatively easy ulcerated tree spirit. It dropped the rotten staff, which I was able to inspect the details of to confirm that it was a colossal weapon. This was really nice to get, as it meant that I now had 2 purple rarity weapons to combo and no longer needed to visit a second mineshaft for a level 2 smithing stone. I then went on to open the nearby Evergaol, which contained the tier 3 ancient dragon. At this point, I was getting very strong and so did not struggle to defeat it. The reward choice was difficult on this one, and it was between 30,000 runes and improved dodge. In hindsight, the improved dodging was the better choice, as I would go on to get more than enough runes to reach level 15. However, I did not know that at the time, so I went with the runes. Next, I stopped by a castle point of interest to try and get another Stonesword Key, as I was fresh out. I was also able to scrounge up a few more runes to reach level 14. I had a pretty clear path from here to reach another Evergaol and a couple more field bosses. I plan to use any remaining time clearing the central fortress bosses. Also, at this point I had cleared so many Evergaols with the relic that increases attack power for doing so that my damage was starting to scale up to a ridiculous degree. Also, given that I was certain I would reach level 15 at this point, I started prioritizing passive bonuses over runes from the Evergaols. By the time I reached the Royal Carrion Knight field boss, I was absolutely steamrolling everything in my path. At level 15 and with time left to spare, I made my way towards the central fortress. The first thing I needed to do, and this is crucial for a solo expedition, was to visit a merchant to purchase a Wending Grace. In solo expeditions, you can purchase one of these in Limveld and one just before the final boss of the expedition. We will want to make sure that we get both. Next, I wanted to clear the basement boss of the fortress first, and at this point I was confident I could handle even the red-eyed bell-bearing hunter. In addition to dropping a substantial reward, defeating the basement boss at the central fortress grants us access to a chest that contains a choice of 3 talismans. The Claw Talisman is great, but I already had one equipped and no duplicate talismans are allowed. With that, I took my favorite short path up to the rooftop of the fortress to defeat the boss there. Most of the time, if the night starts closing in before you've even begun fighting the boss on top of the castle, I would recommend just completing other tasks while slowly moving towards the final zone for day 2. However, I was so strong at this point that I was fairly confident I could defeat the rooftop boss in a few seconds. It was a fairly tough boss, the red-eyed draconic tree sentinel, but even so, it went down in just moments. Again, this was a bit of an unnecessary risk, but I managed to defeat the boss, select my reward, and quickly head towards the final zone. We have one more opportunity to get stronger after the final boss of day 2, and that is before we move on to day 3. For this, you'll want to check your map and look for useful points of interest to visit that are out in the night. If they are relatively nearby, like a church or a merchant, you can probably visit them before moving on to the final day. In this example from a different expedition, I hadn't yet purchased my Wending Grace from a Limveld merchant, so I went to do that. There was also a charge near enough to the final zone that I was able to get a 7th flask charge from it. Keep in mind that the knight will eventually start dealing very high damage if you stay in it for too long, so don't stray too far from the final zone. In any case, those final preparations turned out to be well worth it on that expedition, as they allowed me to barely pull off a victory against the Everdark variant of Adele. While I did still have plenty of flasks left, I did go through all of my Wending graces. Returning to the main run of this guide video, I ended up traveling to day 3 at level 15 and with just over 300,000 runes to spare. This was more than enough excess funds to buy the Wending Grace from the day 3 merchant and any other consumables I might have needed. It won't always be the case, but in this particular run, I was basically able to ignore the mechanics of Everdark Adele and melt him with damage. That is all I have in the way of tips, but if you feel I left out anything important, you can leave your own tips in the comments where I'm sure they will be appreciated, if not by others, then definitely by me. If you want to see more great content, you can head over to my channel, and if you're new, consider subscribing. You're helping me feed my cat. Her name's Marshmallow. Have a great day. If you're here today, have a great Saturday and a great weekend. And as always, thanks for watching.